welcome to the Expat Pod. My name is James, I'm your host, and today I'm with Rebecca. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone where you're from and where you've lived?
Hello, my name's Rebecca. I'm Swedish, but I lived in several places. I just moved back to Sweden last year after living 12 years abroad. So I started by moving to England, where I spent a couple of years. Then I moved back to Sweden in between actually, and then I had a couple of months in Italy. Then I moved back to London, did a year and a half in Barcelona, ended up in Ireland where I lived for 3 years, and then in 2021 me and my Irish partner decided to move back to Sweden. So that's where I'm now. So to sum it up, it's more or less 12 years in total.
A real European travelling journey. So welcome to section 1 of the podcast. This is all about getting there. And as you said in the introduction, you've lived in so many different places, which is amazing. Also must be quite a headache to think back of how you got there and all the places you've been to. So can you just kind of elaborate on each location and what was the story of each of them?
So I started by moving to a place called Mersey Island, which is actually an island which is in the county Essex, very close to Colchester, so like about 2 hours drive, I think, from London. So I was fresh out of college and I wanted to improve my English. So in Sweden you learn English, but not to the extent where you're just like, I'm super confident speaking to an English person. So I was like, I want to improve my English, and I've always wanted to work in travel. So I was like, first step towards that will be like, being, at a level where I'm confident speaking English. So I was like, okay, what can I do? And I actually started out as an au pair. So, like girls can do it, guys can do it. And it's a great way of kind of like having a first introduction to a country, because you don't necessarily have to think about accommodation or a job. The job is being an au pair, but you don't have to work your logistics around like, what kind of job can I find and the papers that goes into the job. So I went onto Au Pair World, found this lovely family in Mersey, which was the little island. And for me, it was perfect because I come from an island. So to move to like a big city like London, it felt way too big. So yeah, that's how I was like, okay, great. I've got a job as an au pair, and after that I just booked my flights. So that was the first way of getting into the country. I was being really well taken care of. I was looking after 3 little boys, and yeah, it was a great introduction to a country, because it was like a first feel for the country without the headache of like sorting everything out. So that was my first experience of kind of like moving abroad. And then I think 6 months on, I was just like, I just love it. I just love living abroad. I want to continue on that journey. So I went back to Sweden for the summer, and just to earn some money. And because I'm a Manchester United super fan, I've always dreamt of having a season ticket at Old Trafford. So I applied for one, not thinking I would get one, but I did. So I was like, okay, great, I'll move to Manchester. And at this point I was a lot more confident, because I got to a point where I was just like, I can communicate in English. I think it's all about that kind of self-confidence as well, because when I was living at Mersey, it wasn't like London. I couldn't surround myself with Swedish people. I had to actually go out there to make new friends. And I arrived in January, and this is a very popular summer place, and there was like nowhere to go, no one to hang out with. So the only place I did go was the pub, because there was the only place I could go and watch football. And it kind of just gave me so much kind of confidence that like I can go here and I can socialize with the locals, and they accepted me for being one of the locals. So I was like, I can do this in Manchester too. So yeah, next was moving to Manchester. A lot more research going into that, because I had to find a place to live, and I also had to find a job. So first of all, I started to look at what kind of accommodation can you find in Manchester, and I quickly realized that like finding an apartment for yourself, which is quite a common thing in Sweden, that was out of the question. So at this time there was Facebook, but there wasn't any Instagram, and people weren't like super into Facebook just yet, so you didn't have all these kind of social groups where you could gather information. So I just had to do like Google research and found all these websites called Rent a Room. Yeah, so I put up an ad and then booked a hotel for a week, arriving into Manchester, and basically like had a week to find a place to live. So there was a lot of viewings. Some went well, some didn't go so well. And then eventually I found this lady who was renting out her daughter's old room. And I was like, it's a bit outside the city. But again, I was like, I wanted to find something that I felt, I'd rather live a little bit outside the city, because to me it was important to have a home where I kind of felt safe and being taken care of. I mean, she was really that kind of character that she was, I moved in and the next day she was like, okay, I'm going to show you the area, I'm going to help you with like a bank account, etc. So she actually got me my first job, and that was in a pub.
That's so kind of her. That's the thing with people from the north, anyway, because I'm from the north as well. They seem to be very open to everyone. Like, there's like a north-south divide in England with a rivalry, you probably know. But people from the north we're friendlier, we'll help everyone out, and people from the south don't do that. I'm sure it's not true.
Maybe she took a pity on me as well, because I mean, I was, about to turn 20, and, I said, oh, I'm going to live in Manchester because I'm going to watch Manchester United for the season, and having no job. But no, it just worked out perfectly. And for me, it was like, to me, it was important to find a place where I kind of felt comfortable living, rather than like finding a flat share in the middle of Manchester, only to be cramped up with other people that I didn't know, and, something that I wasn't too happy with. So she got me like a couple of hours in a pub, and that just got me like started off. So that's really how I got there. I don't know how much you want me to elaborate.
I think that's perfect for Manchester. But how long did you spend there?
So I was there for the season, so it was coming up to 1 year. And then I met my British boyfriend at the time, so that kind of made it easy for me that I'm going to stay in the UK. And next place I moved to was London.
And was it a good season for Manchester United that year, or was it?
No, they ended up second, but I got to see two amazing derby games against City. I also saw them losing to Leeds at home, and they hadn't played Leeds for many years. And I went to some amazing away games. So I
think it's not always the end result. It's always about the sunning in the sands and enjoying it, which makes it fun sport. So then London. So talk to me about why you moved down to London afterwards.
Okay, yeah, so then I moved to London, and I actually remember sitting on the bus, arriving in to Stansted, sitting on the bus thinking, how am I ever going to like living here? Because to me it was like, I mean, Manchester was big, but I had been in Manchester before, so I had a feel for it. Whereas if London, I'd been to see friends, but I was just like, I couldn't get my head around where's the centre of London? How am I going to get to know anybody here? Because, 10 million people or something like that living in London is the same as the whole population of Sweden. So I was like, oh, I'm going to hate it here. But again, I was like, it was really about like just finding my place in the city. So we ended up living in a part of London called East Finchley, which is North London, where it just really felt like a community itself. And I think for me, being like from a small island, it's all about like finding, that one thing like that makes me feel that like, in the bigger perspective, like this is my bubble. So yeah, I continued working with children. So I had worked in a creche when I was living in Manchester. So I became a nanny, ended up working for two lovely families. And yeah, then I was just trying to kind of like find social groups where I could meet other people. So, with the job, I met some lovely people because there was a lot of internationals also working as nannies in London. But then, I love football and I like playing football. So I also tried, all these football groups. Yeah, that's how I got to London. And then, I don't know, 2 years living in London, I just loved living in London and loved how anonymous I...
Oh, it's amazing as you said, for a city with so many people, it can be quite a lonely place, I find. I would go and not speak to anyone for a whole day, but you see so many people because everyone kind of quite insular as well.
Yeah, and I just think it's amazing for such a big city that it has so many different parts. So it's like, you can't really have your local pub, and I had my routines, like I had my cafe and, I would have gone to the same pub watching the football all over and over again. And, some people I would recognize, some people were new to me. So it was really like a bit of both. And yeah, living where I was living as well, it was very kind of residential. It was very green, so it didn't really feel like living in a bigger city, but at the same time the city was always there, if I wanted to have like the bus, I could always jump on the tube. So 2 years in, I was like, I love living in London. I didn't think I was going to, but...
So then when you finished in London, was that after the 2 years? Is that when you went to Italy? Or?
Yeah, so I went home for a while, and then my previous boyfriend, he moved to Italy because of his job. So I went back to Sweden, and then, you know, I followed after him just for a couple of months to do like an Italian course in Bologna. So yeah, I didn't have to like sort any accommodation out or like any job. So this was different. So I actually did a bit of study. That was very nice as well. It was a very different experience to having lived in England, because, you know, I think for a lot of English speakers, you know, like, you know, you don't really think about it unless you're actually like, you know, putting yourself in a situation again where you have to like basically like learn a whole new language. Like arriving into the UK or to England, at least, you know, like I can communicate in English. It was just more about like, you know, improving my self-confidence and really putting myself out there. Whereas if moving to Italy, like I did Italian studies, but again, it was really about putting yourself out there again and trying to communicate in Italian, which, you know, it's very difficult then, and, you know, especially like, you know, if you have to get things done.
Completely. You can order food and you can order drinks, but when it comes to important documentation, it's quite difficult. Asking for directions to quite an obscure place might be no, and they don't speak so much English. They can, but they probably choose not to. Like where in France is a similar situation as well. But then, so you've been to Italy, and then you said you moved to Barcelona afterwards?
I was back in Sweden for a couple of years, and then, to do some studies myself. So I studied to become a travel consultant because I just wanted to work with travels. And it was a 2-year course, but it allowed me to do some internships. So, you know, I went back to England for my second internship because I just couldn't let go of England. I also used my summer break to go back and work as an au pair again, because, again, it was a great opportunity to go back and not having to think about like getting a, you know, accommodation or, you know, like another kind of job. So yeah, I went back to London, and then I got a job in the travel industry working for a travel operator because I wasn't finished with London. And then, yeah, again, then I met my current boyfriend, who's Irish, and he happened to be in London on a work transfer, but he was actually based in Barcelona. So that's why we moved back to Barcelona. So yeah, again, arrived in Barcelona, had to find a job, had to find a place to live, had to deal with the Spanish authorities, which is a night. And again, a very different experience to having lived in the UK and even in Italy, because arriving into Spain, I could communicate somewhat in Italian. I had studied Spanish in school.
You're going to say Catalan is quite common, which is more like Dutch, right?
Oh, I don't even know, but in my head I think I was kind of silently protesting, because I was like, no, I'm trying to speak Spanish to you, but they wanted to speak Catalan with you. But then in my head I was trying to say Spanish things, but what came out of my mouth was some mix between Spanish and Italian. So in the end, I didn't feel comfortable enough like speaking
Latin then.
So yeah, in Barcelona, it was we found an apartment in Barceloneta, which is the area which is next to the beach. And I think, again, it was just really about finding my little bubble. And I loved the area for like how local it was. There was a lot of local people living there, and it was next to the sea, so I felt right at home. It was hard to kind of find jobs, and I think it still is. But there's a couple of like international companies where, you know, like international people can easily find a job. It's just that like with most jobs, there's no job security because a lot of them are kind of project based. But I ended up working for HP, which was completely different to travels, but I was like, I need to get a job. And at the end of the day, it wasn't a job I was loving, but I did like my colleagues, most of them.
Which is quite important, I think, as well.
I think you have to kind of be prepared that when you move abroad, as much as you want to kind of engage with the locals, it is much easier to kind of connect with other internationals because they share the same experiences with you. They're also on the lookout for maybe new friendships. So I think, you know, them being in an international company and in a project where, you know, like you have a mix of Swedish people and other Scandinavian people and German and English, like a lot comes easier to you, like it almost comes free to you because you don't have to go out and necessarily look for it, you know, like there's people there and, you know, they want to hang out too.
Yeah, it's one thing I've noticed since moving to Sweden as an adult, basically, is you move alone and everyone's got their established friendship groups, and people I'm friends with are more international than local because of what you said, because even your family aren't here and you haven't got your pre-established groups, so it's easy just to kind of join a group of internationals who are looking to explore a new city or up for doing things which are local. Like I wanted to go curling and do like random Swedish stuff, which people from Sweden maybe don't want to do because they've always done it. Whereas we're like, yeah, it's something new, it's interesting, let's give it a go. And then I think lastly, you're in Ireland, right, on your list. So is that again your boyfriend going back home?
Well, after Barcelona, we were a bit like, maybe not that we were necessarily looking to settle down, but yeah, the next place we were living, we wanted to maybe own. We didn't really see any potential places to like live in Barcelona. I think it was going to be very hard because of the lack of job security, and I wanted to be close to someone's family, and we had started to talk about having children. So yeah, we were like, is it going to be Sweden or is it going to be Ireland? So yeah, we decided on Ireland, or maybe I decided on Ireland for the two of us. But yeah, we moved to Ireland because I thought it'd be a lot easier for me because I already speak English. I ended up staying for 3.5 years before we moved back to Sweden. So yeah, again, we moved to Ireland. You have to get all your papers and all that. But funnily enough, it was like I started looking for a job, and then I saw on LinkedIn that one of my old colleagues that were still based in London working for the tour operator that I had previously worked for, they were looking for staff in Dublin, and there was a company in Dublin that had just been bought over by the London company. So they were like, why don't you send me your CV and I'll put it forward to the HR manager in Dublin. And that's how I got my first job, and that's the only job I had while living in Dublin. And for me it was quite amazing because on my second day in my new job, some of my old work colleagues actually walked in through the door.
And then the reason for moving back to Sweden, was there a particular driver for that, or just...
I think it was like after, having Kian, which is my son, that was also a very different experience to maybe having had him in Sweden, because I mean, obviously I don't have anything to compare to, but like I would have only heard like what it's like to be in Sweden, and like I'm familiar with the Swedish system, etc. And then having him in Ireland, and the lack of kind of family around, or my family around. And then his second year, like his first birthday was in lockdown. And then, it was a very hard lockdown in comparison to Sweden again. And, couldn't see my friends and family for a very long time. We didn't really know when can we travel back next. And, like when they're so small, there's so much like happening daily. And it was just like, I know Sweden and Scandinavia in general, they're such great places to kind of have kids. There's like, I think our first quote for like a creche in Ireland, it was 1,200 euros.
And it's free, right, in Sweden, or it's heavily subsidized?
It's not free, but I think we are probably paying around like 140.
Wow, so it's 10% of the cost.
It was the headache of finding a place in Ireland as well, because over here it's like you put your kid on the list and it's actually up to your local community to kind of find you a place within, like a guarantee of 4 months or something like that. Whereas if in Ireland, it's really on you. So it was the stress of that. And then coming from Sweden as well, I was like, I'm definitely going back to work. But then when I returned to work, the first kind of like reaction I got from my colleagues were a bit like, oh, we didn't think you were going to return to work, because in Ireland, there's a different kind of, like a lot of women, they become stay-at-home moms, but they still have like young children, which for me, it was just like, I couldn't do it that way, like I was really looking forward to go back to work at that point. So yeah, I don't know, like when it all came to it, and especially like the lockdown, it just made it easier for us to kind of make the decision on like, okay, let's go back to Sweden.
Amazing. And so that kind of brings a nice picture of your travel life, and concludes a good first segment of the podcast, so thank you. Welcome back to section 2 of the podcast, all about being there. So it's trying to understand your experiences, your first impressions of each of the places you've lived. Obviously, there's a long list. We talked about your experience of language, but what it was like there, how you learned it, and how you made friends, and how you kind of got around your day-to-day life. So I guess we'll start off with England. I think you kind of talked about the au pair work, which we quite well contained, but maybe in Manchester, like how you made your friends. Obviously, you said in the pub, in sports. Was it difficult? Was it easy? Did you find it there was some strategies which were better used? And how did it compare to Italy or Spain or Ireland?
I think in terms of like finding friends, well, my first experience of living in England and being an au pair, you know, I really had to go out there to make friends because I wasn't in a workplace, so no, I wasn't automatically like surrounded by people. But then again, you know, like I met other girls and guys that were also working with children, so it was more like, you know, okay, so, you know, I can see that you're also minding some children, so in our free time, you know, like we would plan little trips or go into the cinema or cafes. It was a great way of kind of like meeting people, and I'm still in contact with a lot of them on Facebook, which is lovely. When I was living in Manchester, it came a lot easier to me because even though I had traveled to Manchester on my own, I had like a friend from before. I knew he was going to move to Manchester at some point, but I didn't really know him. He was from Norway, and then he knew of somebody, and then I knew of somebody, so we all kind of came together as a little gang. And you know, like the one thing that we had like in common was like going to, you know, all the matches. So I would work in one place, they would work in another, but it was like a match midweek. We would meet at the pub or something beforehand, and then I actually ended up sharing an apartment with one of them as well. So yeah, we had like a little group of friends. I think we were about 5-6 of us.
And going from Manchester, how did you find the accent? The UK's got so many.
A lot different to the one I heard in Essex, which was, you know, and then I don't even want to say, it's nothing like London, but it was different. But I don't think I had any troubles like understanding it. Not in comparison to a person from Liverpool or, yeah. And funnily enough, it's like when people hear me talking now, I'm not so aware of it, but you know, my partner would have said, you know, like when he first met me, that like, you know, oh, you sound really British, but you know, that's because he's very Irish. But now after having been with him for, you know, coming up to 8 years, like people tell me that like, oh, you have an Irish twang.
I was going to say you do have a bit of an Irish twang. It's the use of the word like and stuff, it's quite common,
which I don't know, I've just picked it up. Like, to be honest, I haven't even thought about it. I think, you know, like having spent time around like English people when I was living in England, you know, like I just adapted to their accent. So, you know, by the time I moved back to Sweden to do my studies or to Barcelona, I would have said, you know, car. But now, after having lived in Ireland, I say car. And I don't even think about it. So I think even in Manchester, like there were certain words that I just adapted. Like I would have said, you know, I was working in a creche, so we'd gone through all the like children's rhymes and nursery songs, and the way they said, you know, they wouldn't say pick up, they said pick up. So that's how I would have sung the song.
It's so interesting, language and the nuances of even one language, so which I'm learning slowly in Sweden. Like the sound from the north is yes, and then like people when they're thinking go make like a constant throat noise, where I just wouldn't expect from a language, and it's quite interesting. It's nice to have the variance. Otherwise, it's boring because I've noticed when I've been in Sweden, I'm speaking a lot more slowly just so I become more understandable. But also because of that, I think I speak more American because with media, especially the growth of Netflix and everything else, and everyone's used to the American English, not British English, which can be quite annoying. But you then have to think, okay, how would someone know what I'm saying or understand it? So you kind of think of the American terms and use them. So my girlfriend, when I first came to Sweden, I was saying like city rather than city and not pronouncing my T's. And she was like, you're not speaking English anymore, stop it.
But I mean, English, it's like you're not aware of it, but it's like it's actually a very, very hard language to learn, because it's like, and things that I didn't realize, you know. So we start learning English in Sweden at the age of 10, and like you said, you know, like a lot of it is American English because that's what we pick up from telly, and I think kids these days they pick it up from YouTube as well. So they, you know, like they know how to count before they're 10. But like when I first moved to England, I was living with a family. They were all speaking English to me in their own accent, and then I was spending a lot of time with the grandparents as well, and they were great. You know, they took me out on like, you know, day trips and stuff like that. And I remember one thing that we were like doing in the car was like, you know, they said you have to get like the difference between, you know, a chip, CHIP, and a ship. And that's not something we would ever learn in school. But it's obviously two different words. It means two different things.
Words, I can't say the h sound very well in Swedish. And I get the the extra vowels, always get them wrong. I think, that word is this, and then my colleagues go, no. I guess it's just you need the exposure and the repetitiveness of it, which is maybe why it's harder from an English-speaking person to learn Swedish, because everyone speaks English so well here, whereas at least no one speaks Swedish in England, really, as a second language. So you're forced to speak English, which is a benefit for everyone who's learning a second language.
There is a place in Gothenburg, though, called a language cafe.
Yeah, I've heard it. I need to find some time to go, because I saw they have a group for Mandarin, but yeah, Swedish is what I need to learn. I'll definitely, hopefully, attend some in spring.
So after Manchester, I moved to London, because that's where my previous boyfriend was living at the time. So obviously I didn't have any friends when I moved to London, and I was working as a nanny, so again I wasn't surrounded by people. I wasn't in a workplace. But yeah, I met another couple of, I think this was in around the time where people were using Facebook a lot more than the previous 2 years. So I started to kind of look for groups online, are there any nanny groups in north of London, are there any football groups? And yeah, I connected with a few people that were also working as nannies, and then also from my employer at the time, they would have known of somebody that also had a nanny, so they were trying to make it a nice experience for them because they were living in house. So it's okay, maybe you can exchange contact details. So yeah, I met a couple of people, and then I really wanted to play football as well. So I looked up a couple of football groups and did a couple of trainings with different groups. So it was a good way of meeting people. I didn't necessarily make any friends because it was more local people that were engaged in these groups. But yeah, what I take away from my London experience was this one Italian girl, and it was very funny because I lived in East Finchley and we had just moved into a basement flat. And this girl, an Italian girl, we had connected and sent each other a couple of messages on Facebook, but her English was quite poor. So I tried to kind of say, shall we meet for a coffee? But she didn't get my message. So I was okay, is it even worth trying to arrange a coffee date here? Because she clearly didn't understood me. We were still friends on Facebook, and then one day I just saw that she put up pictures from the first snow, and I was looking at the pictures, I was that looks like it's the same street that we're currently living at. And then the next picture I was oh my god, that's my house. So I had to send her a message. I just said I don't know if this is a coincidence, but you took pictures of my house, whereabouts in North London do you live? And it turned out that she lived in the house just next to mine. Working as a nanny, an in-house nanny. And then after that, it was great. I could go into her house, she would come into my house for coffee, and a couple of months in, her English had improved so much as well, so we could communicate. And yeah, she's one of them persons that I just took away. It became a true friendship, and I have seen her afterwards. So
it was purely luck and chance that she had to live adjacent to you.
The one thing about friendships when you live abroad is that just with other friendships, but you might not be so aware of it because you have been friends since university, or you've been friends since childhood, is that especially these days, or living in a big city like London, it does take some effort.
Yeah, it's you need to work on the one-to-one relationships as well. Whereas in university, there's a group of you in the same situation. You all go in not really knowing anyone. Okay, you might know one or two people from Facebook beforehand, but you're there just all going in open for social activities. Whereas when you go to work or by yourself or in a couple, it's very much you meet one person, you spend that time with that person, and that becomes your friend, and then you do the next person, and it's very much case by case basis. But it makes those relationships much better because it's a collective struggle.
Overall, looking back at my 12 years, I think that besides having seen great places, what I really take away from them is the people I met, and it's been people that I didn't necessarily think I was going to connect with, but they shared a moment with me, or like, you know, we have shared experiences together, and for that reasons, like I feel that we're, you know, forever connected.
No, completely. You always have those kind of things to reminisce about, which is wonderful. And then I guess whilst we're still in England for a little bit, what was your favourite English saying or like Englishism that you experienced?
I don't know. I kind of like. I don't necessarily know if I have a favorite saying, but I like words that I kind of picked up that I wouldn't necessarily have, you know, known before. Because Rob, my partner, he doesn't like me saying this because you don't say this in Ireland. But like the word pudding, it's like, you know, the kids I used to mind, like the family would be like, you know, oh, they can have you know, they can have some fruit for pudding. And the first time I heard it, I was just like, what do you mean? Pudding is like a pudding. It's like, why are they having fruit and pudding? But, you know, finding out that what they mean is actually they can have fruit for dessert.
Yeah, I would always say pudding growing up. It's always, yeah, you'd have your pudding, which can be anything from cheesecake, it can be ice cream, it can be fruit.
And then I think, well, for being Swedish as well, where we don't necessarily like, I heard this from other people as well, but, you know, like, going into like a shop in London, for example, you know, they can greet you by saying hello, love. And, you know, like I had friends coming over to see me and they would be like, why are they saying hello, love? I don't know this person. So I think it's, I don't go around and say hello, love. I don't go around and say hello, darling. But it still kind of made me more aware of like how I speak. And I think I put like a lot more adjectives in there because it's a lot more tolerated and it's much more okay to do so in the English language than we do in Swedish.
Yeah, it's a good point. We do have a lot of openings.
Yeah, but I think it's even like, I mean, it's not that us Swedish people, we don't want to say it, but it's just we kind of tone it down a bit. So like if we see like, you know, someone is like, oh, you know, I gotta show off, you know, like my new dress or something, you go like, oh, that's nice. Whereas if I say, oh, that's so beautiful, it just makes it sound like it's so much grander than just nice. And for me, I think it's a really nice way of actually being able to say much more to people that I care about. It's giving me like a more window to kind of do so, rather than like, I don't know how I would have put like the same kind of sayings in Swedish because it wouldn't have sounded as nice.
I guess also in a stranger, we probably see us in Manchester a lot, but strangers get called love and pet and darling and whatever. You don't have to even know who they are. That would be thrown around. It is quite interesting. And then kind of expanding on that, then in Italy or in Spain, obviously Ireland might be quite similar, but Italy and Spain are obviously substantially different. How was it being there in terms of, obviously the language? It was quite difficult, but
yeah, the language was difficult because I think it's not necessarily always about like just, you know, being able to communicate in that language. It's also about like learning how they use it. So, you know, a Spanish person might not necessarily always be angry just because it sounds like they are. And same in Italian, you know, like they're very vocal and, you know, they use their fingers and hands a lot to express themselves, but that's just how they do it. I think in Italy, I was, you know, a very short time, you know, only a couple of months, so I didn't really put my Italian to like everyday practice. In Barcelona, I felt that like I was really trying for the first couple of months, but it was hard, maybe even harder because I was living in a part of Spain where they're really trying to stick to the fact that they know Catalan as well, which is very different to Spanish. So if I were going to a shop and I was trying my best at saying, you know, like, can I have a bag, you know, in Spanish, they would reply back to me in Catalan.
That's what I mean in Sweden. Yes, I asked the question in Swedish, but I reply in English because I can't think of the words.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know, for me, it was... Yeah, I can't say that like after a year and a half living in Barcelona that you know, I'm any better at Spanish than when I first arrived. If anything, I think it kind of demoted me a bit to learn Spanish because first of all, you know, like the locals, and I don't know if this is just because I was living in Barcelona and in an area of Barcelona where everyone is quite anti-tourists, but... Yeah, the overall feeling was a bit like you're not wanted here, or at least for that part of Barcelona. So, you know, that didn't really push me to want to learn Spanish more. I knew enough to kind of like get around what I wanted to, like, you know, if I wanted to order a drink or, you know, like just basic stuff. But then I didn't really have any Spanish friends either, so I was never put in a situation where I had to actually rely on my Spanish. I could always get around by just speaking English, and I met people that had lived there for years, and that's all they knew.
It's a good point, because I know I've got some friends who've lived in Sweden for so long, and they don't speak Swedish. They only speak English.
I think it's, Swedish people are they're quite happy to speak English as well. So, the only reason I think I really tried to push myself to learn Spanish, speak more Spanish, was whenever you had anything to do with Spanish authorities, a lot of them knew how to speak English, but they just wouldn't. So, if you were trying to understand what they're saying and trying to make yourself understood, you really had to try your very best Spanish. But I think in Sweden, you can easily just get anything sorted.
Completely, or I use the translator app a lot on my phone for any emails or letters I get through from Skatteverket or somewhere. Hopefully it's not a bill. And then Ireland, to me, I've been to Ireland, but how did you feel the differences were? Maybe to London and to Manchester?
Well, I think, first of all, like you said, I think Manchester, even compare it to London. I think London is like no other city. You can't really compare it. And when people say to me, "Oh, I've been to England," I was like, "Oh, where did you go?" "Oh, London." I was like, "You haven't really been to England. You've seen, a glimpse of it, and but you haven't really got an actual feel for it." So, I think what I really liked about Ireland, and I still do, is the people. They're extremely welcoming and just very open to kind of welcome new people. So yeah, but again, it's even with the accent and the language, it's it's English, but speaking of accents, there's so many accents on such little area. And remember speaking from people to Cork, to me, when I started to speak to people from Cork through work, I was just there might as well have been someone speaking African to me, because I couldn't understand a word. Or having a conversation with someone from Scotland, again, it's extremely difficult before you kind of got your ear used to it. So I think, fortunately for me, my boyfriend and his family are closer to Dublin, so they're quite easy to understand. But there were still sayings, and again, just how they use English, they can sound quite harsh. It's a lot of kind of thick, and for me, it's a bit I've always grown up knowing that, oh, that's a swear word. But it's not to them. It's just it's just how they speak.
The pace, I think, I find, is the difficult bit. Same with Spanish or Italian. They speak so quickly. To me, Irish is spoken very quickly compared to England, which is why it can be difficult to understand, because you think they're saying some words, but it's actually a sentence. And then, come again, what was that? And then, yeah, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. It's and then again, I can't compare my experience in Ireland to London. But I don't know. I think you can feel that they're a smaller population. They're quite knitted together. It's somebody, and that person would have known of somebody, and it's and then if you're in the middle of an Irish family as well, you definitely get a feel for that. That it's not it's not a very big country.
But it's beautiful though. The coastline, especially on the west, is just amazing to go and travel. So hello and welcome to section 3 of the podcast, which is a recap of your time in the many places you've lived. And so I guess the first question I have is, what kind of advice would you give to someone living in each of the locations you've been to?
Well, I think it goes for wherever you live in the world. If you're an expat or having just moved to a new country, I think it's all about putting yourself out there. Have an open mind and try not to compare. I know it's quite easy to always go back to oh, this is what it's like in my home country, but trying to embrace the new country for what it is, and try to keep an open mind about things, because accommodation is going to be different, workplace is going to be different, the way of socializing is going to be different. So, and then just putting yourself out there, I think I'm very much of make things happen for yourself. Don't expect to kind of sit at home and suddenly have a new group of friends. And I think that this is something that, like moving to England first time around when I was only 19, I still felt quite shy, and I've gone on a journey on not just like having seen new places and met new people, but also like on a self journey, like I've become a lot more outgoing. And I don't know if it is because of my experience living abroad, but I also like to think so, because I had to really challenge myself and really had to make things happen for me. And I'm still very much like that now, that like, I can sit here and have like a really boring Sunday or I can jump in the car and I can go somewhere, and then at least I made something of that day. So I think, for anyone who lives in any country, just, like put the effort in. Sometimes, like, especially like when making new friends, it is hard. And especially like when you made friends and then friends move on. I think that's the hardest part about living in another country. But yeah, try new things. Like I encourage like meeting people through Meetup. I think Meetup was great for me because, like it's in all the bigger kind of, European cities at least. You can find so many like, different groups, like whether that's walking group or hiking groups or football groups. Like when I moved back to London my second time around, I joined a football group and I played with a group of guys in Regent's Park, and we played every Sunday and Thursday. And I mean, some of them people, they turned out to be great friends and we're still friends today. And it was just like what kept me going some weeks, knowing that like every Saturday I get to play football. And it was, it was hard at first, but then you meet so many people. They all come from like the same kind of situation. They're just looking to engage and, connect with other people. So, I'm so glad I did push myself to go.
I think I've done a similar thing with Meetup. I joined one in Gothenburg for hiking, and there's so many different activities people want to do, which is amazing. And on the topic of sport, I play volleyball. And yeah, so I joined a local team here, and there's a really good beach volleyball place in Gothenburg. It's indoor, so in the winter it's perfect. And like you said, you see the same faces, you start to have conversations with people, which is the way in which to grow.
Yeah, and I think even if you're not necessarily always hanging out with these people outside the activity itself, like it's about like also creating a life for yourself, where like, whether that's playing volleyball or football, it's like, okay, so that's my Thursday night, and feeling that you're part of that community, even if it's just for like an hour and a half or an hour, like, and that might be the only like social engagement you need from that week. So, but then you can join different groups, and like you can have, and I think that's the beauty of like living in a place like London or like any bigger cities, is that like you don't have to just be the one person, like, and restrict yourself to just being the one activity. Like you can actually like branch out, and like you can do be the yoga person on Sunday and have that community, and doing something else on a Saturday night.
That's amazing. And I guess another kind of recap point would be, now you've moved back home, or back to Sweden, maybe not home, but back to the country you're from. Looking back at your whole situation, would you have done something differently? Would you have changed it all? Or has each kind of step just morphed you into the person you are today, and without it, it'd be difficult? It's quite a difficult question to answer, but is there something which you thought, I wish I knew that earlier?
No, I don't think so, because I think that like if I had been super prepared like for every situation I'd been in, I wouldn't have learned anything from it. And I think that's what it really is. Like moving back now to Sweden after 12 years, I just like, the one thing that actually scared me the most was like moving back to Sweden. I feel like I can move to any country, it doesn't faze me, but moving back to Sweden and like having to adapt and, I don't know, like act Swedish and act the way that people are expecting me to act like, because I was born here, I grew up here, I should know what the system is like. That actually scared me more than like moving to any other country.
You couldn't hide behind not being from there.
And I think that's kind of like, looking back, I mean, like, in terms of like having like finding work or like finding accommodations, I'm sure there's things that I could have done differently. Like, maybe it would have been a smoother process if I had contacted that person directly or something like that. But like looking back, I think in general, I have no regrets. I would do it all over again. I still don't think that I'm at the place in my life where I'm going to be forever. I have very itchy feet. But yeah, no, I don't think I would have done anything differently. If anything, I think I would have maybe pushed myself even more to, go after those friendships or go after those jobs that I wanted. Yeah.
And you just mentioned it briefly, but part of this next bit was the future. So you said you have itchy feet and always want to keep moving. Is there somewhere you want to live still? Anywhere in the world? Or?
Well, I was back in London last week to see friends, and just because I haven't been back since the pandemic. And I mean, I would still love to move back to England one day, just because it's my favorite destination. But I don't know, like in general, like for every place I've lived, it really feels like coming home in a way. Whenever I do go back, I really consider myself having like many homes. So even like if I could go back to like say Barcelona for a couple of months a year, just to kind of still that desire I have. Or like now when we moved away from Ireland, I'm going back to Ireland next week to see family and friends. We're going to wedding. But I think like for me, I just need to have kind of plans to go places. But yeah, one day I'd love to move back to England.
You cared about you, but your partner's now seen out living abroad from where he's from.
Yeah.
How's he finding Stockholm? Does he speak Swedish or?
So he lives in Gothenburg, and he I mean that has been quite challenging, because obviously we moved back to Smögen because we needed to kind of like have a first place to stay, and then he's been looking to get jobs, but the first job he got was in Gothenburg, and he's quite happy in his workplace. So he actually lives in Gothenburg Monday to Friday. Which is challenging, and I think obviously it's quite interesting to hear now, because he has lived abroad a good bit himself. He lived in Barcelona, he also lived in London, and he's Irish. He also lived in France for a while, but I think for him it's been the hardest to maybe move to Sweden, because this time around it's a lot more like we have a child as well, so you can't just like pick up your bags and like look, I'm moving on to the next thing. So maybe it's more so that, but like no, he's loving the kind of the Swedish outdoorsy. He loves his fishing, so he's got like about 3 fishing rods, and he picks up his fishing rod whenever he's back here. And yeah, I think he's liking it so far. And what we do really like as well is obviously the all advantages of moving to a Scandinavian country, which is like the practicalities of having a child and not having to think so much about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things you hear outside of Sweden is the childcare benefits are just so much better than anywhere else, which you just said takes a lot of the pressure off the parents.
It does, but then I don't know. I can say for the both of us that we really do miss the pub.
I've noticed a few English pubs in Gothenburg.
Yeah, we've been to like I think he has a local pub where he lives. But whenever we've been into Gothenburg together, we always end up in a pub. So either that being the Irish Embassy.
I've not been there yet, actually. I always think it's a bit too fake, but
it probably is. But like, and then there's like the John Bishop as well, which is more of an English pub. Like they have a few, but yeah, it's
the Flying Baron is my favourite one.
Even our son is like, he plays with his little cars and his little people. And the other day he was like, oh yeah, they're going to the pub. I was like, oh my God, he's really an half Irish child. And I was like, what are they doing in the pub? And he says the grown-ups have like a drink, but he thinks it's also like a place of treats, because whenever he's been to the pub, like he gets, chocolate or crisps or something.
A good point to bring up about the hybrids. And I've noticed there's a lot of international communities here in Gothenburg especially, which you can do the things which you miss at home, which is one of the things that I would recommend if anyone moved abroad, is look for something familiar as well. So yeah, you go explore, but make sure you know where, if you are missing home, you can go find it. For instance, a pub with you and your partner is a nice grounding place to go and be comfortable and relaxed and not worry about anything. It's that kind of thing, having that kind of safety net.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like, I think I touched on that previously, but just creating your own bubble and whatever you're comfortable with. So it's like, I think once you have like that kind of ground stability, it's easier to be this outgoing person who's like pushing yourself to do other things as well. So I mean, for me it was always like going to IKEA. I mean, it's not like I'm always going to IKEA now, but like, the sense of like, oh, whenever I go to IKEA, I'm going to be able to pronounce the names of these furniture, or like I'm going to be able to pick up some Swedish chocolate or something. But on the IKEA thing is like, in Italy, very, very disappointing because they don't do like a classical Swedish menu. They serve, an espresso rather than like the filtered coffee. And like the most of the dishes are actually very Italian glorified. Like, it's not just, meatballs and mash. It's like, meatballs with like pasta and a tomato ragu or something like that.
I had that actually for lunch yesterday in Sweden, was a plant bullet with linguine. I was like, this is not very Swedish.
And same goes for England, like the way they have meatballs with chips.
I don't think I've ever had meatballs and chips before. But
It's no, that's not the way to eat Swedish meatballs in IKEA.
it's a great way of ending on that bombshell of never have Swedish meatballs with chips or pasta. Only mash is a
Yeah, only mash.
Right, so thank you very much for your time, Rebecca. It's been really interesting listening to you talk about all the various locations you've lived and getting your insight onto each location, even in the same country, how much they differ. So thank you. I don't know if you have any like recap or anything you've enjoyed about this experience or anything else you'd like to share. You can say no, it's perfectly fine.
I think for anyone who's thinking about moving abroad, just do it. I don't think you'll have any regrets. Like, I think if anything, it's going to be challenging. Yes, you're going to have to like really go out of your comfort zone, but it's going to be rewarding in so many ways. And in a way, I'm like, I don't know, I had